Hello everyone and welcome to this Global Fleet Champions webinar on the safe system approach to road safety. If you're new to our webinars, Global Fleet Champions is a partnership campaign administered by Break, the road safety charity, to prevent deaths, injuries and pollution caused by vehicles driven for work. To learn more about the work that we do and to access fleet safety resources and more events, please visit globalfleetchampions.org. Our webinar today looks at the safe system approach to road safety and the principles and pillars that make up that system. We've got 4 fantastic speakers who will be discussing elements of the safe system and how you can adopt some of them within your own organisation. This webinar topic is also linked to the theme of Road Safety Week this year, which takes place in November, and I'll give a few more details at the end of the webinar.
Hello everyone. So I think the best way to demonstrate the safe system, or at least get into that sort of mindset, is to provide an example. So take this image of a crash and imagine that driver was coming towards you doing about 100 kilometers an hour, which is a typical legal limit for this type of road in New Zealand. They're momentarily distracted, they drift off to the left, and at which point they lost control on the gravel, they overcorrected, and the car slid sideways into this pole. And as you can see, the driver would take the brunt of that impact, and at that speed and that angle, it would likely be a fatal collision. Now, if you took a very narrow or very traditional view of road safety, it's really easy to say, tough luck, the driver should have been paying attention. You would focus on why the person crashed, and rather than why they were killed. And you might focus on a particular element. You might hear people say, well, 100 kilometers an hour is perfectly fine, just drive to the conditions. But that doesn't really take into account all those other factors, like the pole and the fact that they lost control in the first place. And most crashes are often, the result of a simple error of perception or judgment, in otherwise compliant people. But under the safe system, you challenge that thinking, and it's a harm minimization approach, and you question all the elements that led to that fatal outcome. Why is there a pole on the edge of the road? That's clearly a hazard. Is 100 kilometers an hour really a safe speed for that type of road? And how would the outcome have changed if this was a 5-star rated car with features like stability control and curtain airbags? Because when we make mistakes at high speed and on poorly designed roads in vehicles that don't protect us, that would be a multi-system failure because the entire safety system has let them down, let that driver down. So I've already alluded to some of the principles there in that example that underpin the safe system approach. The first one is that we're human. We make mistakes. We might not like to admit it, but we do. And we're really fragile. So a really simple mistake on the road can have really catastrophic consequences. It's just not ethically right. The second concept is the idea of a shared responsibility rather than just blaming the driver. We all have a responsibility, whether you're a car manufacturer, a lobby group, a driver, you work for a government agency, we've all got a role to play. We're not just blaming the drivers. And often you might hear in the safe systems lingo, the safe systems pillars, and there are 4 most commonly quoted pillars. These are on the left on your screen. So safe people, safe roads, safe vehicles, and safe speeds. And the idea is they work together because if one of those things lets you down, your person is distracted or perhaps under the influence of drugs or alcohol, the road is forgiving, the vehicle protects you, and the speed is such that that impact won't kill you, because ultimately we want to reduce fatal serious injuries. Don't mind it if the panel beaters kept busy. That's, crashes can happen. We just don't want people to get hurt. So now I'll just go on and talk very briefly about the those 4 pillars I just mentioned, and I'm sure my other speakers will go into a bit more detail on these further in the presentation. So first of all, just want to talk about safe speeds. And when we talk about safe speeds in this industry, you often come back to this graph on the left here. So this is basically looking at the risk of dying at different impact speeds for different impact scenarios. And the bit of the target there is about a 10% fatality risk. If you can maintain that level of risk, that if you can drop speed so that your risk of dying is less than 10%, then that's definitely a strong move towards a safe system. So for collisions involving pedestrians or cyclists, that would be 30 kilometers an hour or less as an impact speed. side collisions 50 kilometres an hour because that's between vehicles, because vehicles tend to be quite vulnerable on the side compared to the front. And then frontal impact speeds about 70 kilometres per hour. And just bear in mind these impact speeds, we're not necessarily talking about speed limits. And there are lots of ways that we can reduce speeds to survivable levels. So speed limit reduction is an obvious one. We can use technologies such as that top right there, which is advanced warning systems at rural intersections. This detects side vehicles entering the intersection and requires the through traffic to slow down, just in case that person makes a mistake. Again, that's bringing that speed down to a survivable level. And you'll often see infrastructure improvements that are aimed to reduce vehicle speeds. So there's a safety platform there that reduces speed so that when pedestrians are walking across and a collision happens, they're less likely to be hurt. So the second pillar is the safe roads and roadsides. So typical safety features you might see on a road to improve their safety is things such as rumble strips or a wide shoulder. So that gives drivers a chance to be aware that they're entering a hazard and then have some space on the side of the road to correct themselves. I guess the obvious one is moving the hazards away, and if you can't move them, then you put in things like barrier or you try and minimize them as much as possible. And something that we'll see a lot more in New Zealand in the next few years is wire rope barrier, which you can see there on the right, especially on our high volume roads where there's a real risk of head-on crashes. And these are incredibly strong. You can see that's a very heavy trailer running into that wire rope barrier, and that prevented that crash from happening, potential crash. So the third pillar is your safer vehicles. So I took this still from a video online of a 2015 and a 1998 Toyota Corolla. You can find lots of these videos on YouTube if you're into watching crashes. And you can see there that the more modern Corolla retains its shape. The impact is absorbed by the front of the vehicle, and there's a whole host of safety features such as airbags that limits the amount of injury that would result from that crash. And what's an interesting fact I came across in New Zealand's road safety strategy is you are twice as likely to die or be seriously injured in a 1- or 2-star vehicle compared to a 5-star vehicle. I think it's something that we tend to forget, or a lot of people forget when they're purchasing a car. And what's really scary is that that type of car represents about over 40% of New Zealand's vehicle fleet. So there's a real problem there. And finally, with the road use pillar, this is all about ensuring that your drivers and your road users are skilled and alert and they're following the road rules. So in order to ensure that our drivers are skilled and alert, you might think about interventions such as behaviour change campaigns and advertising, making sure people are using seatbelts and helmets. Seatbelts is an interesting one. You think we would have got that message through, yet over 80 people die every year in New Zealand and they're not wearing a seatbelt. It's also an area where workplaces can really influence driver behaviour through policies and procedures targeting the company fleet and drivers. But if everyone obeyed the road rules in New Zealand, we'd still have more than 180 deaths on the road each year. So, reinforces the fact that we need to focus on all 4 elements of the safe system, not just the road user. So going back to that example that I showed you earlier, here are 6 things that would have improved the outcome for that driver and that vehicle. So if all those 6 things were there, there's a chance that that crash may not have happened. And if it did happen, they might have had a few bumps and bruises, but they would have been able to walk away. And just finally, I'll only touch on this briefly because this applies specifically to New Zealand. So New Zealand's had a safe system approach to road safety for the past 10 years, and we've just released the new road safety strategy called Road to Zero. And the idea of Road to Zero, or Vision Zero is another term you might hear, is really taking a safe system a step further and saying that no loss of life is acceptable. It's not about minimising, it's actually eliminating death and serious injury. So it takes a much more serious approach to safety. There's quite a few things that will come out of that in the next few years. $1.4 billion spent on road safety infrastructure. You'll see speed limits being reduced, particularly around schools, and there'll be a whole lot of enforcement and policy interventions coming out as well. So that's a really quick overview of the SAFE system. If you want to know a bit more, I strongly recommend that New Zealand Transport Agency video on YouTube called The Difference Between Life and Death, and I'll acknowledge that I stole some of those images from that video. So yeah, check out some resources there. That's the SAFE system.
And thanks everybody for joining. So today I'm going to be talking in a bit more detail about the driver behaviour and road design aspects of a safe system. So looking at how drivers think and behave and what we can do in terms of road design and encouraging people to make good choices to get those safe outcomes. So I'm going to talk first about driver behaviour, particularly some of the unconscious and unintentional habits that drivers have beyond their conscious decisions, and then into how we design roads for safety and health and how we can use those insights to choose safe routes, especially if we're managing fleets and have an input into decisions that people make about where they go and how they get there. So first, some background into driver behaviour. These insights come mostly from my PhD thesis in cognitive psychology, where I investigated daydreaming during everyday driving. And what we know from the safe system, as Dale has said, is that humans are people make mistakes and people are vulnerable. What we also know from cognitive psychology is that people are lazy creatures of habit, and if our brain can avoid applying a lot of effort to thinking about something, then it will surely do that. It will switch off and let our automatic processes take over. But shouldn't we just pay attention? It's something that we are told from the moment that we sit in a car as a learner driver, especially as we get used to the mechanical controls. Pay attention is a very common mantra, especially perhaps from the parent or instructor sitting next to us. And this has been a common theme through the ages. These snips are from New Zealand newspapers over the last around about 100 years. And there's always been discussion and popular interest in encouraging drivers to pay attention, and that would solve everything if we could all just be good drivers. And this quote perhaps is one of my favourites. It says from the Evening Post in the 30s, "Driving a car is a full-time job. It cannot be combined with sociability, lovemaking, sightseeing, window shopping or daydreaming." And perhaps some of those activities are a bit more distractible than others. And so I'm going to talk in more depth about daydreaming. The point of this presentation really is that no human pays attention to what they are doing all of the time, particularly for a really well-practiced task in familiar environments like driving our own car on streets that we drive often, such as your regular commute. We found that all drivers report that their mind wanders at least some of the time. And we did some more studies on the actual streets, and I sat in cars with people while they were driving their actual commute to work from home and just around regular Hamilton streets that they knew very well. And over half the time, people would tell me that they were thinking about something that was not explicitly related to the driving scene in front of them. But obviously these drivers aren't driving around crashing all of the time. So our skills and habits that we develop when we are learning to drive hold us in good stead most of the time. They mean that we usually keep a good distance to cars and other road users around us. We tend to learn where tricky spots are, and we are flicked back into attention at those. For example, there's a quite busy and narrow roundabout in Hamilton, and all of my drivers who went through there said, "Oh, I hate this roundabout, I always pay attention." So the perception of risk means that they're used to having close interactions with other drivers, usually safe ones. So it means that they're paying more attention because they know they can't go into cruise mode. And really, it's incredible how sophisticated human brains are to get us from A to B safely most of the time. So in this figure at the top of this slide, I'm saying that most of us are actually good drivers. They might daydream quite a lot, but that doesn't have an impact on crash risk because they have very good habits and they regulate their attention so that they're paying attention to the right things at the right times. And in any case, somebody can be focusing very much on driving and be in my boy racer category where they're actually ignoring some of the rules with conscious intent. So Daydreaming and mind wandering is not something explicitly to worry about. The important thing to be sure of is that our drivers have really good habits and then good practices to make sure that they're operating at the best of their capacity. I'll come back to that in a moment. So in terms of designing roads for safety and health, good road design aligns with those drivers' unconscious expectations of what they're going to come across in the environment. And it also affords good behaviour in terms of telling them what speed they should be doing. Most drivers wouldn't be able to tell you in an instant without looking at their speedo what they're doing, but the road design itself will lead them to either speed up or slow down, depending on how narrow or wide it is, how much other traffic is around, how much space and freedom they feel that they have. And this leads to the common phenomenon that we experience of drivers speeding up in a passing lane, even if they're not intending to overtake. A lot of that is known to be caused by just the opening up of the road, and it feels much more like an open racetrack with a lot of clear space around you than the narrow, windy section that you've just come through. So predictable and forgiving roads also have really clear markings, consistent signage, and even if a driver doesn't notice a particular sign, they may process it unconsciously, and so it all contributes to their good habits and driving practices. So the safest roads in our system, and this is backed up with crash data, and you know, they're at the best standards of safety. So they protect road users from each other. This is an image of a 80 km/h arterial urban road in Hamilton. We can see that high traffic speeds are separated from traffic in the other direction. They're also separated from pedestrians. There's an overbridge which is shared for walking and cycling. And intersections are controlled with interchanges, which mean that people in different directions cannot physically collide or shouldn't do, or roundabouts, which intentionally lower speeds to survivable forces. The safest urban streets where there are pedestrians and cyclists around are slow, and this is one of those safety platforms that Dale mentioned. So in urban places, we want to have narrow and busy looking environments where the speeds are physically almost limited to survivable speeds in case of a collision. So if somebody does make a mistake or they're looking out the window instead of where they're going, a crash is unlikely to happen in the first place because they will be alerted in time to brake, and it's unlikely to result in serious injury or death because those speeds, as we said, are managed to survivable forces. The hardest streets to make safe are urban mixed use, what we call mixed use arterial roads. They're mixed use because they have a through traffic function. They're often important links through a city or a town, but they also have a high place function, and there's a lot of interaction with shops and businesses and industry alongside. So there are a lot of vehicles turning in and out of those businesses and crossing the road. There are a lot of dense intersections, and there are a lot of traffic lanes. Now, the best way to manage safety on these kinds of roads is to manage speeds, and they can be managed with lower speed limits, of course, particularly if they are well enforced, also fewer traffic lanes, and that can be reassigned or reallocated to higher occupancy lanes or public transport, and narrower lanes and carriageways because they give this message to the drivers that this is a lower speed area. The safest urban intersections, as I alluded to, are roundabouts for drivers anyway, because speeds are managed and the collision potential is much lower than higher speed movements through a signalised intersection where there isn't any speed management. So if somebody makes a mistake at a traffic lights or signalised intersection, then that mistake is likely to result in a high speed collision or near miss. Whereas if a mistake happens at a roundabout, it's likely at least one of those drivers was stopped or slow moving. But we know, of course, that roundabouts are often risky, scary, dangerous places for people on foot or using bicycles. So best practice now will say that we manage speeds again where those road users interact. So we have safety platforms on approaches, and/or we have grade separation with underpasses or overbridges so that those interactions are mitigated. Here's an example of a roundabout in Hamilton, and I'm circling the location where I had to slam on my brakes because I was nearly hit by a daydreaming driver. and it wasn't very funny at the time, but he was heading straight through, and because there are 2 approach traffic lanes there, he didn't have to wait behind another driver, and he had quite a clear kind of run. He was looking for traffic past me, he didn't see me, so I just had to sit there in the middle of the road and think about what was going on in his head for a while. So yeah, there are best practice interventions we can do to make these places slower, even slower still, so that any of those collisions between vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists can be managed. Now, how that affects choosing safe routes and what we should do for fleet management, the best advice we can give is to drive fresh. So beyond what has been talked about and will be talked about in terms of managing the propensity for drivers to do illegal or distracting activities, I'm assuming that we have good and well-behaved drivers. We don't have so much control about what they're thinking about when they're driving and whether they daydream or not. The implications of those daydreams depend really much on whether the driver is fresh and healthy and alert. So driving fresh and stopping for regular breaks is super important, both to keep that unconscious process really active and engaged, and to ensure that the right conscious decisions are made at the right time. So in terms of route planning, the safest roads are where we should stick to as much as possible. That means we're not driving too much on those mixed-use arterial roads. We should really only be using them at the start and end of our journey if possible. And to cut your drivers some slack if they are travelling through urban streets, because really safe speeds are low speeds, and we don't need pressure on people to be zooming through our small towns and our larger cities as fast as they can, because there are often vulnerable people about. In terms of longer journeys, perhaps involving rural roads, regular breaks are super important, at least once every couple of hours on a longer journey. And bear in mind that when people are driving in busy conditions, in darkness or in difficult weather, so imagine a journey, for example, on a congested motorway on a dark and rainy evening. That's really intense kind of journey, and people will say, oh gosh, I'm so tired. Well, that's because your brain has required you to be paying attention. You cannot switch off in that kind of environment, and paying attention costs something, and that something is your energy. So we need to schedule more breaks and allow more time for those kinds of journeys. There are sources online to find out information about what the safest routes are in New Zealand and overseas. So KiwiRAP is our version of the international IRAP system, and it maps collective risk, which is the overall crash numbers really on a route, and personal risk, which is the crash rate per kilometre travelled on any road. So we can see black routes there and red are the least safe, and the yellow and green are more safe per kilometre travelled by a driver. There's also journey planner information so that we can work out how long a journey is typically going to take, and this is based on data from people who have already made that journey many times in the past. So that can be really helpful so that we can schedule breaks and hopefully align them with the best copy stops. So to summarise, not only are drivers vulnerable and likely to make mistakes, they're also not paying attention all of the time. That's not something that we have to have a training session about. We cannot control the thoughts that are in a driver's head, but we can encourage them to drive fresh. Safe roads separate different road users, or they manage the speeds, and that's really the basic kind of premise of safe system design. It's safe, it's slow, or it's separated, or ideally both. And when you're choosing safe routes for yourself and for others that you work with, consider allowing for lower speeds and having policies about allowing break times when you're working out how long a journey is going to take. And above all, make sure we all drive fresh. So that's that. Thank you very much, and welcome your questions later on.
So today I'm going to cover off from the fleet management aspects, and how an owner would view the management aspects of a fleet, not how they administer it, but how it's managed, and the decisions of how they would procure the assets and bring assets into their fleet. Our primary focus is as an independent, providing advice to our government and corporate fleets, and we take a consultative, independent approach to help people make decisions on the assets that they've got now, and when best to divest them, and what is the best, most safest, most sustainable choices that they can make in the future. We've got our own personal visions on how we would like to see the New Zealand fleet reduce in age and increase its safety rating. But of course, we're governed by the imports that flow into our country and the governance provided to the distributors that are importing cars into our country. So those obviously have an effect on the choices that people make. We've developed a series of online tools that empower the customer to make ultimately very well-informed decisions, to have insights to what is available to them in the marketplace. There is a lot of information available in the market, but it's in siloed places. So the whole idea of the systems that we've developed is to bring them into one place so that people can see what's going on. So today, focus around the purchasing of new vehicles is one of the key things. We ultimately promote a series of weighted criteria. We focus on safety. We say a minimum of 5-star safety ratings, and to also focus on what vehicle is ultimately fit for purpose and what has the highest number of safety features. And you'll see safety features, as you'll probably all well know, over the years and into the future. We've got some very, very cool technology like adaptive cruise control and lane change assist, and much better internal systems for allowing the customer to talk on the phone, although they're not meant to be, but they're having those systems that allow you to do that in a way that's safe. We're also focused on sustainability, and we're promoting heavily where electric vehicles are fit for purpose or where they make sense, and the uptake of low emissions or low CO2 vehicles. And lots of those vehicles will often be discarded or discounted because of their high capital costs or outlays. And so we focus heavily on the total cost of ownership. So what's the impact of buying, running, and selling the asset? What's its cost per K? Using that as a deciding factor rather than just focusing on the capital outlay, which would stop most people from making decisions to buy vehicles that are lower CO2 because they cost more. So the first thing that we focus on for a customer is, or that they should ideally be doing themselves, but it's a service that we provide to an organisation, is an audit. We audit their fleet of vehicles and develop an independent vehicle register that we tap against our national records. Now, in New Zealand, these records are maintained by the New Zealand Transport Agency, but in each country there will be some form of formal records. We are fortunate in this country in that we get very good clean access via an API to consume the data that these guys have available, which means our ability to update a register and its ownership details, its compliance details against those records is relatively seamless. And we're checking for age, safety, compliance. We develop a view of the carbon footprint, and that's obviously documented, and baselines are set for future performance measurements. We consume the odometer from that API, but if the vehicle is less than 3 years old, so there's no recording, we'll either consume the data from the company's GPS data or rely upon information coming from the client. So once we've updated that register and we have a firm view of the assets, there's also a capital replacement plan that's developed in that same document or that same setup. And the capital replacement plan is based upon either sourcing activity where we've gone to market and either government or corporate pricing is provided, or the last known capital replacement cost is detailed in that document. And vehicles are either replaced like for like, or they will be replaced on what is a next best fit for purpose option to meet the future requirements for that organisation or that driver. We also provide a current residual value. So this obviously feeds back into the replacement plan. So we'll have the capital replacement cost less the current residual value, so that the customer will know what their net budget requirements are. We also pick up on any ownership anomalies. The way that the system works is that if a vehicle is registered to one of the business organisations, we have access to the company's unique identifier. So if a vehicle is registered to them, it comes into the register window, and if a car is sold and deregistered, it will come out of the register and go into historic record keeping for any future referencing. We also, in this first audit piece, can identify what we believe are EV candidate vehicles, and this is purely based upon you know, the annual mileage, and plus whether there is a vehicle, an EV vehicle that is of a class like replacement. The next phase we get into is to study, and we study the fleet based upon how well it's being utilised is one of the key things, and one of the key drivers here to any fleet management is the deployment of GPS technology to a fleet. So essentially, if you're operating a fleet and you don't have GPS technology, you are failing quite significantly. Picking up on the previous presenters, having any insights into driver behaviour is almost impossible, apart from if you were sitting in the car next to a driver. Route planning, route optimisation, utilisation is impossible without it. So through the study, we develop specifications based upon the fit for purpose requirements. We consume the GPS data from the telematics provider, and we develop a profile of the organisation, how they use their fleet, or how the fleet's intended to be used, like hours of use, locations of use, whether it's on-road or off-road, private or public. We then analyse that data to report on performance, and we develop availability charts that look at the use on average, and then down into the 85th and the 95th percentile of use. And it's the vehicles that highlight themselves in these lower percentiles of use that are typically earmarked for divesting due to underutilisation, and also typically present themselves as EV candidates based upon their daily utilisation. We also conduct fleet management administration reviews, and so the management stuff is around policy, which focuses on age replacement, safety replacement, sustainability replacement, weighted criterion. Charger infrastructure review, so it's all very well making recommendations to a fleet that they could be deploying electric vehicles and making those sales, but along with an electric vehicle needs to come the charging infrastructure, and there can be significant costs associated with that, depending upon the parking locations, and in fact even are there parking locations available, and how close are those parked to power supply, and what does the reticulation look like for a site. So we conduct those reviews as well as part of the recommendations that get attached with EVs. Vehicle tracking and market reviews, we conduct those as well to make recommendations to fleet, or we run RFPs for fleets to uptake GPS trackers where they don't have them. And we obviously develop charger infrastructure strategy. The final phase is the optimizing. So once you've audited your fleet and you've developed your plan and you know what you need to source, figured out what you can divest and what you need, then optimizing your fleet is the next phase. And to do that, you clearly need to have well-detailed specifications of a driver's fit-for-purpose requirement, set minimum criteria for safety, sustainability. In New Zealand, we conduct a lot of independent sourcing on behalf of our government and corporate clients. So depending upon who you are as a client will dictate who the pricing comes from, and typically governments with distributors and large corporates as distributor focused, whereas SME and private individual buyers is via dealers. And so we manage an online e-procurement bid management tool where we go to market on behalf of the customer, and the client, and the supplier makes their response in the portal, and the data is naturally collated, and once it is collated, we can then produce the total cost of ownership modelling, which also considers ownership versus lease and cash cost summary. So all this information allows the customer to go, what are the vehicles that are available from the market based upon each class requirement? What's the safest? What's the number of safety features of each vehicle that I'm considering? What's the capital cost? What's the running cost less a forecasted residual value equals the whole of life value? What's the CO2 outputs over the intended life? So the buyer can make a really, really well-informed decision on buying what is the safest, most sustainable, most cost-effective over life. And then obviously the services that we provide is once the decisions are made upon the vehicles that they want to secure, we manage the sourcing piece, the signing of a bid is the beginning of an ordering process, which triggers a dealer or a distributor to make that vehicle available, and then we start on the disposal of said asset. And just finally, some of the key benefits of this independent position that we provide allows the customer to have a single source of truth, a reliable, up-to-date register, making sure that they're accurately paying taxes or GST and other taxes on their fleet, claiming of road user charges, for example, knowing that their compliance requirements are up to date and where they are outstanding. And we help our customers, with very, very good independent information to understand when it's most economic to either divest vehicles because they're underutilised, or replace vehicles, or to lease or buy vehicles. And obviously part of that sourcing piece is to consider where an electric vehicle or even a hybrid vehicle is a suitable new vehicle replacement. And obviously purchasing new vehicles at market competitive rates. Our independence in this process allows us to benchmark the offers that are made to the market and provide the customer with some assurances that the rates that they are achieving are fair and reasonable based upon the volumes that they're purchasing at any given time. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Caroline mentioned, I work for Johnson Controls, and I wanted to spend just a quick minute talking about who we are and what we do. So Johnson Controls New Zealand, we are a national provider of security, fire, HVAC and industrial refrigeration services. We have 14 branches across New Zealand with over 700 staff and a fleet size of around 440, ranging from both small size hatch vehicles through to mid-size vans and utilities. We do average over 3 million kilometres over the course of a year in all directions throughout New Zealand. and we've always had a significant focus on environment, health and safety, extending through to road safety. So with that in mind, I wanted to share a little bit about our journey, about our story. So a few years ago, Johnson Controls, we decided that we wanted to aggressively target our motor vehicle crashes in order to prevent them from occurring. There were two reasons for this. The first was that as an organisation, we never wanted to be in a position where we were involved in a crash that caused injury to either one of our staff or to another person. Now, the chart that I've placed here, it isn't Johnson Controls data. This is from the New Zealand Transport Agency, showing crash statistics across New Zealand for the years 2005 to 2018. It is something that we used when we did start up on our journey to have a look at what trends we could see throughout roads across New Zealand. So as this data demonstrates, far too many fatalities occur on the road, and unfortunately the majority of those killed in car crashes each year is the driver. Now, what is even more surprising, or what was more surprising to us at the time, was that 73% of workplace fatalities between 2013 and 17 across New Zealand were vehicle related. So as an organisation, we knew we needed to pay just as much attention to vehicle crashes as we did with other aspects of workplace safety. The second reason we knew we needed to focus on reducing vehicle crashes was the money being spent on damage repair with even minor crashes we were having. So as an organisation, we knew it just made good business sense. This next slide I've put up was another piece of information we used while we were setting out on our journey. So when we set out as an organisation to reduce vehicle crashes, one of the things we focused on while creating a program was the mechanisms that led to the crashes, the causes. Again, we looked both at our organisational data as well as what was happening within New Zealand as a whole. Some of the data that we looked at was from 2015, so this chart here, where the NZTA data shows loss of control, speeding and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs as the leading causes of fatal car crashes. But as you'll see, there are also a number of behavioural factors that lead to crashes, including inattention and fatigue. So we knew we needed to focus on driver behaviours as well as general driving skills. So this next slide here sets out the journey we took as an organisation. So for Johnson Controls, we wanted our road safety program to be holistic, one which included both formal policies and procedures, as well as the necessary requirements to support our workers to keep safe while on the road, as well as having some positive reinforcement through rewards and recognition. I'll now discuss each one of these in a little bit of detail. So the first one here, our driver safety policy. Now, a safe driving policy helps out an organisation meet obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act, which we have here in New Zealand. An effective safe driving policy can help minimise the risk of crashes and injuries and ensure workers are provided with the right tools to be better safer drivers within organisations. Now, it is important to note that once you have created a safe driving policy, that you do incorporate it into your business's health and safety policies and procedures, and that's exactly what we did. You must ensure all workers know about it, especially those who drive as part of their jobs. Now, there are 5 key components that should be included in a driver safety policy. The first relates to policy aims and objectives. The policy should clearly state what is expected from the worker while on the road and what the organisation will do to help them meet those expectations. The policy should also be reviewed regularly. At Johnson Controls, we do ours every 2 years, but it also should be done every time there is a change in order to keep up to date with new rules and regulations on the road. Number 2, set driver responsibilities. So workers should clearly understand their responsibilities when it comes to being on the road, including the process of traffic and parking infringements. Also included here are requirements for maintaining appropriate driving licenses, regular inspections and maintenance of the vehicle, and reporting of any crashes or damage. Fatigue management should also be included. Number 3 is promotion of safer driving. Now here I've included requirements around mobile phones while driving, use of Bluetooth kits, not driving under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and also not driving while fatigued or tired. You could also include in requirements around driver training here. Number 4 relates to vehicle maintenance and servicing. Now it's important to remember that appropriate vehicle maintenance and servicing is completed in order to ensure that vehicles are as safe as possible. At Johnson Controls, we have requirements to carry out routine inspections on a monthly basis using a checklist, but there is also a requirement for drivers to complete a daily visual check before using the vehicle, checking things such as tyres, lights, engine oil, etc. There are also now a number of online platforms available that allow a number of checklists to be formed. So you can get rid of paper checklists and so forth. And those can include anything from the monthly check through to a more simplified daily check. Number 5, finally, is to provide a company safety handbook, which is a quick reference guide containing key information such as contact details, procedures to follow when a crash occurs, copies of checklists, etc. At Johnson Controls, we've implemented this by way of a red folder that is easily visible when needed. In the folder, that not only contains road safety information, but we've also doubled it to include general health and safety resources. I want to touch on the driver distractions policy. So as I mentioned in slide 4, driving while distracted is a leading cause of fatal crashes throughout New Zealand. One of the most effective ways that organisations can make a positive impact to reduce work-related crashes is to have and implement a policy that prohibits cell phone use while driving and restricts your driver's distractions. At Johnson Controls, we implemented a ban on both use of both handheld and hands-free mobile devices around 10 years ago in recognition of that fact. Certainly wasn't an easy decision and wasn't taken lightly, but we did feel that it was absolutely necessary to prevent crashes. We did face a lot of criticism around whether productivity would be reduced as a result of not being able to take a call while driving, even from within our senior leadership team. But we did run with it, and over the course of a few years, the reduction in our crash incidence rate spoke for itself. It is important to remember that when we aren't suggesting phones can never be used. It was just a case of reminding our staff that when they get into their vehicles, they need to either switch their phones off or place it on silent, or if safe and able to do so, then pull over to take a call. Nowadays, there's also snazzy new features on phones such as Apple iPhones that actually detect when you are driving and redirect calls automatically to your voicemail. 2 points I will make is that your policy should cover all distractions, not just phones. And second, in order to be successful, your policy does need to be practical, applicable to your work circumstances, clearly communicated and understood by your drivers. This next slide just touches on safe vehicles. I won't dwell on this too much. Dale's obviously covered some information relating to NCAP, but one of the things we did implement very early on in the piece is that we knew that we needed to provide our workers with the best possible vehicle we could to keep them safe. For many of our staff, their vehicle is their workplace where they do spend a large proportion of their working day. So besides having to find vehicles that were both comfortable as well as practical, our biggest priority when selecting vehicles was to ensure that they did have 5-star NCAP ratings. And for those outside of Australia and New Zealand, NCAP refers to the Australasian New Car Assessment Program, which is Australasia's independent vehicle safety authority. So these are star ratings which are published for a range of new vehicles entering the Australia and New Zealand markets using a rating system of 0 to 5. NCAP ratings indicate the level of safety a vehicle provides for occupants and pedestrians in the event of a crash, as well as its ability through technology to avoid or minimise the effects of a crash. It was an easy decision for us to make to only source 5-star rated vehicles. As I've mentioned on the slide here, other features that should be looked for in a vehicle include seat belts, airbags, anti-lock braking systems, and electronic stability control. The structural integrity of a vehicle is also important, and in a crash it is vital that doors remain closed but are able to be easily opened after a crash so occupants are able to be removed safely. Next slide, just wanted to touch on driver training. Again, something we implemented early on in the piece. So a driver education and training program should be part of any organisation's workplace health and safety strategy, and is obviously very much in line with what our workplace health and safety legislation requires in New Zealand. But one of the most important things and something that we put in place was the first step being determining the most appropriate education and training by conducting a training needs analysis. 3 factors that do need to be considered as part of this analysis includes reviewing the task, the actual driving requirement associated with the organisation. Secondly, understanding the desired outcomes within the organisation. And third, knowledge of the practical skills as well as behavioural skills required to achieve the role or outcome. Earlier on in the piece, we were running driver training courses just for the sake of having it done within the organisation without having a clear understanding of what we actually required from it. We did courses such as defensive driver training around a racetrack, then moved to basic driving skills courses, and finally onto online modules focused on hazard perception and improving driving behaviours. But we found none of these made any impact as it wasn't focused on what was actually leading to our crashes occurring. We've since moved on to a training program which focuses on an improvement in safe skills and driver attitudes and behaviours. As I mentioned, the majority of our fleet are mid-sized vans, and the causes of our crashes related to low-speed manoeuvring and in particular reversing. So we found a provider that was able to deliver a program suited to these needs, and both the results and the feedback from the attendees has been great. I'll also make a point that there may need to be a whole program around driver training, not just one-off courses. So as I've listed here, things to consider include training focused on senior executives to ensure you get them on board before a full rollout. Induction training, which is important to ensure workers are made aware of an organisation's road safety programs, but also to identify any further training needs that may be required. You might also need to look at specific training for international recruits. As an example, we had a number of new employees join the business coming from South Africa who at the time were not familiar with New Zealand's giveaway rules. Vehicle familiarisation is particularly important when a new vehicle is handed over, where more frequently than not, it may be a completely different make and model to what the employee was driving previously. We've also had a number of staff complete either remedial training, where additional training was required because a particular employee fit specific high-risk behaviours, or specialist one-on-one training, which could be for specific needs such as ability to drive four-wheel drives or tow trailers. Just a couple last slides. Just wanted to touch on vehicle telematics. Again, this is something we implemented a few years ago. Telematics is the technology used to monitor a range of information relating to either an individual vehicle or an entire fleet. The systems work by gathering data including vehicle location, driver behaviour, engine diagnostics and vehicle activity. We had our fleet equipped with GPS devices, as I said, a number of years ago, and have been able to use the information from this both from a safety perspective, including lone worker requirements, as well as assisting in vehicle crash investigations, as well as from a productivity perspective in being able to dispatch field technicians quickly and efficiently to a job nearby to where they are located. Other benefits we've found include reduced fuel costs through more direct route planning and also detecting unauthorised vehicle use, more cost-effective maintenance, where managers are warned of mechanical issues with vehicles, allowing them to address these problems sooner and therefore reducing the danger of downtime. Better communication, reducing the need for human operators and drivers to check in and report back, automating much of this process. One of the best examples that we found was vital for this was March 2019 in Christchurch, of course, where we were able to quickly and efficiently identify which of our staff were in the CBD area after the mosque shootings occurred. Finally, enhanced safety, as I mentioned, which allows anomalies such as unsafe practices to be detected and addressed quicker. Finally, just wanted to touch on reward and recognition. This was the final item in our program that we aptly called our driver rewards program. Now, using the information provided from the vehicle telematics, we were able to use this data as well as additional conditions such as the completion of monthly inspections and the lack of traffic infringements or crashes to identify our top drivers within the organisation each quarter, and we rewarded them with a $100 gift voucher to a store of their choosing. Not only did this create competition to be one of the prize winners each quarter, but we also had a number of internal branch challenges happening with a leaderboard updated weekly. Believe me, you do not want to be the bottom of the list in front of your peers. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for your time.
Bridget, the perceived higher risk locations have a lower or sometimes non-existent crash record. Is this a good thing?
So it's always a good thing if locations have a lower crash record. The tricky part, especially in urban places, is working out what the true crash rate is, because it's very hard to calculate exposure to risk at an intersection when you've got pedestrians, cyclists and traffic coming from all different directions. So our research suggested that people tend to pay more attention at places perceived as high risk. So that's a good thing if paying attention, if they make good decisions when they're paying attention. Yeah, so generally we want places to be safe, and whether that's through making drivers pay attention in some way, alerting them to hazards, or just making them forgiving and predictable so that we don't need to rely on that, then either way, the safe outcome is what we're going for.
Great, thanks for that, Bridget. Dale, I don't know if you wanted to add anything from your point of view to that as well, given your experience.
Yeah, just briefly, is I know we do a lot of analysis with crash data, and you just need to be a little bit careful that that is often underrepresenting crashes, especially crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists. You know, someone gets hit, they'll often brush it off. They might go to the doctor, but it isn't always recorded. So it's just something to bear in mind as well.
Great, thanks for that, Dale. And Bosia, I've got a question here for you. How often do you review the policies that you have in place at Johnson Controls?
So I guess from a formal perspective, we do indicate every one or 2 years we'll be reviewing it. But as I said, every time there is a change, either to our own internal policies and procedures because we've decided to implement something new, or if there's any legislative or government mandated changes, then we'll review it at the same time. So yeah, so formally once every 1 or 2 years, but as needed with changes required.
Great, and also a quick follow-up question to that was around how do you go about kind of reminding drivers of those policies and also informing them of any updates that there might be, as you say, to changes in legislation or anything like that?
So I guess it's through a number of different ways. So we make sure that you know, hazards relating to driving and safe behaviours and so forth is always at the forefront. That's through regular reminders at what we call our toolbox meetings that happen once every month with the teams. We send out regular text messages just around if there's any particular hazards or changes in weather or so forth. We'll communicate that out. The rewards and recognition program we keep at the forefront as well, because we do like to put a positive spin on it. Even though it's sort of a quarterly program, we'll send out monthly communications just to say, hey, look, this is who the drivers are that are sitting at the top of the leaderboard. And as I mentioned, branches will then run their own sort of internal challenges as well. So I think it's a little bit of everything. As I've said, one of our biggest risks throughout the organisation is driving, is being on the road, and so make sure that that is something that is kept at the forefront of our workers' minds almost daily through different bits and pieces.
That's great. Thanks so much for that. So that's covered off some of the questions. Thank you all for sharing those, and thank you to all of our speakers today for participating. So finally, just before we finish off to wrap up, as I mentioned, this webinar links to NZ Road Safety Week this year. The theme is Step Up for Safe Streets. And the week will take place the 9th to the 15th of November. It's kindly sponsored by QBE Insurance and supported by the NZ Transport Agency. And as part of their sponsorship, QBE have also sponsored this webinar today, so a huge thank you to them. You can access free activity ideas and resources by signing up on the Road Safety Week website. And if you're not in New Zealand, Australia also has its Road Safety Week that week. And wherever you are in the world, you're welcome to look at the activity ideas and resources on our website as well, and to run your own Road Safety Week. We've also got more webinars and spotlight sessions planned for the coming months. So take a look at the Global Fleet Champions website for more details of those. And if you can't make a particular webinar, or if it isn't running in your time zone, it's still worth signing up, as you'll be sent the link to the recording afterwards, so you can watch it at a time to suit you. And Global Fleet Champions also runs an annual awards programme, recognising companies who are putting measures in place to address road risk and reducing incidents involving at-work drivers. Our Australasian and UK awards for 2020 are launching this week, with a deadline for entries of early July. And our global awards are open on a rolling basis to any organisation operating anywhere in the world. So I encourage you to have a look at the various categories and enter at the Global Fleet Champions website. There are both organisation categories and also awards for individuals who are making a difference in fleet and road safety as well. We know this is an unusual and difficult time for everyone during the COVID-19 pandemic, including us here at Break, and we're continuing to support you and to help address your road risk by providing events and resources to share best practice. And we're also continuing our work to prevent road deaths and injuries and provide free support to families affected by road crashes. But our fundraising has been affected as we deal with cancelled fundraising events and activities. So if you are able to help us in some way, it is greatly appreciated, especially at this time, whether it's through a personal donation, such as committing some of your commute to Break if you're currently working from home and saving travel costs, fundraising, and we've got some great ideas for fundraising from home on our website, or if you're interested in sponsoring a project or becoming a corporate partner. And we're also part of the Good Registry, which is running a Kindness from Home initiative. If you've been saving money on things like your workday coffees or lunches, please consider donating some of it to charities, including us, through the Good Registry. So I hope you found today's webinar useful to your work and interesting as well. Thank you again to all of our speakers today, and also to Road Safety Week sponsors QBE for supporting this webinar. And finally, thank you to all of you for taking part. We hope to see you at another webinar soon.